So there's some introductory speakers and stuff, but let's just pick up where I think Baldwin here is about to start.
Oh, just for the listeners, can we get we should just give a little bit of context. This is 1965, and I think it was at Oxford University, right?
I believe so, yeah. So let me see if it says it's. Oh no, Cambridge, but yeah, same idea.
Cambridge, yeah, okay.
Yeah, same difference. The old, old money, elite private university, or whatever. Not exactly,
one of those schools that looks like Hogwarts in the United Kingdom. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. So let's do it to it.
It is now with very great pleasure and a very great sense of honor that I call for Mr. James Baldwin to speak third to this motion.
Now we have Mr. James Baldwin, the star of the evening, who has been sitting, listening attentively. He's getting a wonderful reception here in the Cambridge Union. Tremendous enthusiasm from all sides of the House for Mr. Baldwin.
Tremendous enthusiasm.
The argument. Now we'll bring the voice experience to the debate.
Good evening. I find myself, not for the first time, in the position of a kind of Jeremiah. For example, I don't disagree with Mr. Burford that the inequality suffered by the American Negro population of the United States has hindered the American dream. Indeed, it has. I quarrel with some other things he has to say. The other deeper element of a certain awkwardness I feel has to do with one's point of view. I have to put it that way. One's sense, one's system of reality. It would seem to me that the proposition before the House, and I put it that way, is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro, or the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro, is a question hideously loaded, and that one's response to that question, or one's reaction to that question, has to depend on an effect on where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is, what your system of reality is. That is, it depends on assumptions which we hold so deeply as to be scarcely aware of them. A white South African, or a Mississippi sharecropper, or a Mississippi sheriff, or a Frenchman driven out of Algeria, all have, at bottom, a system of reality which compels them to, for example, in the case of the French exile from Algeria, to defend French reasons for having ruled Algeria. The Mississippi or the Alabama sheriff, who really does believe when he's facing a Negro boy or girl, that this woman, this man, this child must be insane to attack the system to which he owes his entire identity. Of course, for such a person, the proposition of which we're trying to discuss here tonight does not exist. And on the other hand, I have to speak as one of the people who've been most attacked by what we must now here call the Western or the European system of reality. What white people in the world, the doctrine of white supremacy, I hate to say it here, comes from Europe. That's how it got to America. Beneath then, whatever one's reaction to this proposition is, has to be the question of whether or not civilizations can be considered as such equal, or whether one civilization has the right to overtake and subjugate and in fact to destroy another.
Can I just say something here?
Now what happens when that happens?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, just because it's the opening thing, and I just think it's remarkable because almost anybody who has ever done debate, and I used to do it back in high school, and I don't really enjoy it all that much. I haven't for a long time, but they tell you, start small and kind of build your way up, so that you end on a big closer. And it's just remarkable that he has the audacity and the ambition, not to mention the confidence to start by basically challenging the entire vision of reality, not just of sharecroppers, but of Western or European civilization. And you have to have a lot of passion and a lot of conviction in order to do that, and to pull it off successfully as he does in this, right?
Yeah, if you're going to start out with by attacking Western civilization, what's the close going to be?
Yeah, and people's whole conception of reality, right? And he's absolutely right to do so. It's just it's just such a fresh thing to see in some ways.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not, especially because his audience here, like the obvious way to pander to them would be to say that this is something that's like, okay, in this like backward area in the American South, where like they're uncivilized, they're doing this, and instead it's like, oh, well, I mean, they got it from you guys. This is a much bigger problem. It's linked to, like French imperialism in Algeria and all these other things. I mean, it's just like there's definitely some, like he's at the very least, he's confident enough that that he's willing to just bite off all that right at the very beginning.
Absolutely, yeah.
Leaving aside all the physical facts which one can quote, leaving aside rape or murder, leaving aside the bloody catalog of oppression, which we are in one way too familiar with already, what this does to the subjugated, the most private, the most serious thing this does to the subjugated, is to destroy his sense of reality. It destroys, for example, his father's authority over him. His father can no longer tell him anything because the past has disappeared, and his father has no power in the world. This means, in the case of an American Negro, born in that glittering republic, and in the moment you are born, since you don't know any better, every stick and stone and every face is white, and since you have not yet seen a mirror, you suppose that you are too. It comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper.
Line in the debate.
That the Indians were you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you.
He speaks like a novelist also, right? You can really tell that he's a literary author, right? Because he's really evoking this kind of subjective experience of how it is that you conceive of your identity.
Yeah.
For sure.
There. And accelerates throughout a whole lifetime. So that presently you realize you're 30 and are having a terrible time managing to trust your countrymen. By the time you are 30, you have been through a certain kind of mill. And the most serious effect of the mill you've been through is, again, not the catalog of disaster. The policemen, the taxi drivers, the waiters, the landlady, the landlord, the banks, the insurance companies, the millions of details, 24 hours of every day, which spell out to you that you are a worthless human being. It is not that. It's by that time you've begun to see it happening in your daughter or your son or your niece or your nephew. You are 30 by now, and nothing you have done has helped you to escape the trap. But what is worse than that is that nothing you have done, and as far as you can tell, nothing you can do, will save your son or your daughter from meeting the same disaster and not impossibly coming to the same end. Now, we're speaking about expense. I suppose there are several ways to address oneself to some attempt to define what that word means here. Let me put it this way, that from a very literal point of view, the harbors and the ports and the railroads of the country, the economy, especially of the southern states, could not conceivably be what it has become if they had not had, and do not still have indeed, and for so long, so many generations, cheap labor. I am stating very seriously, and this is not an overstatement, that I picked the cotton, and I carried it to market, and I built the railroad.
That one especially has to hurt for Buckley.
Yeah.
For nothing. For nothing. The Southern oligarchy, which has until today so much power in Washington, and therefore some power in the world, was created by my labor and my sweat, and the violation of my women and the murder of my children. This, in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And no one can challenge that statement. It is a matter of historical record. In another way, this dream, and we'll get to the dream in a moment, is at the expense of the American Negro. You watch this in the Deep South in great relief, but not only in the Deep South. In the Deep South, you are dealing with a sheriff or a landlord or a landlady or the girl of the Western Union desk. And she doesn't know quite who she's dealing with, by which I mean that if you're not part of the town, and if you are a northern nigger, it shows in millions of ways. So she simply knows that it's an unknown quantity, and she wants to have nothing to do with it. So she won't talk to you. You have to wait for a while to get your telegram. Okay, we all know this. We've been through it. And by the time you get to be a man, it's very easy to deal with. But what is happening in the poor woman, the poor man's mind, is this. They've been raised to believe, and by now they helplessly believe, that no matter how terrible their lives may be, and their lives have been quite terrible, and no matter how far they fall, no matter what disaster overtakes them, they have one enormous knowledge and consolation, which is like a heavenly revelation. At least they are not black. Now I suggest that of all the terrible things that can happen to a human being, that is one of the worst. I suggest that what has happened to white Southerners is in some ways, after all, much worse than what has happened to Negroes there. Because Sheriff Clark in Selma, Alabama, cannot be considered, no one can be dismissed as a total monster. I'm sure he loves his wife, his children. I'm sure that, he likes to get drunk. He's, after all, one's got to assume, and he is visibly a man like me. But he doesn't know what drives him to use the club, to menace with the gun, and to use the cattle prod. Something awful must have happened to a human being to be able to put a cattle prod against a woman's breast, for example. What happens to the woman is ghastly. What happens to the man who does it is in some ways much, much worse. This is being done, after all, not 100 years ago, but in 1965, in a country which is blessed with what we call prosperity, a word we won't examine too closely, with a certain kind of social coherence, which calls itself a civilized nation and which espouses the notion of the freedom of the world. And it is perfectly true from the point of view now simply of an American Negro. Any American Negro watching this, no matter where he is, from the vantage point of Harlem, which is another terrible place, has to say to himself, in spite of what the government says we can't do anything about it. But those are white people being murdered in Mississippi work farms, being carried off to jail. Those are white children running up and down the streets. The government would find some way of doing something about it. We have a civil rights bill now. We had an amendment, the 15th Amendment, nearly 100 years ago. I hate to sound again like an Old Testament prophet, but if the amendment was not honored then, I don't have any reason for believing the civil rights bill will be honored now. And after all, one's been there since before, a lot of other people got there. If one has got to prove one's title to the land, isn't 400 years enough? 400 years, at least 3 wars. The American soil is full of the corpses of my ancestors. Why is my freedom or my citizenship or my right to live there, how is it conceivably a question now? And I suggest further that in the same way, the moral life of Alabama sheriffs and poor Alabama ladies, white ladies, their moral lives have been destroyed by the plague called color, that the American sense of reality has been corrupted by it. At the risk of sounding excessive, what I always felt when I finally left the country, found myself abroad in other places, and watched Americans abroad. And these are my countrymen, and I do care about them. And even if I didn't, there is something between us. We have the same shorthand. I know, when I look at a girl or a boy from Tennessee, where they came from in Tennessee, and what that means. No Englishman knows that, no Frenchman, no one in the world knows that except another black man who comes from the same place. One watches these lonely people denying the only kin they have. We talk about integration in America as though it was some great new conundrum. The problem in America is that we've been integrated for a very long time. Put me next to any African, and you will see what I mean. My grandmother was not a racist. What we are not facing is the results of what we've done. What one begs the American people to do for all our sakes is simply to accept our history. I was there not only as a slave, but also as a concubine. One knows the power, after all, which can be used against another person if you've got absolute power over that person. It seemed to me when I watched Americans in Europe that what they didn't know about Europeans was what they didn't know about me. They weren't trying, for example, to be nasty to the French girl or rude to the French waiter. They didn't know they hurt their feelings. They didn't have any sense that this particular woman, this particular man, though they spoke another language and had different manners and ways, was a human being. And they walked over them with the same kind of bland ignorance, condescension, charming and cheerful, with which they'd always patted me on the head and called me shine, and were upset when I was upset. What is relevant about this is that whereas 40 years ago when I was born, the question of having to deal with what is unspoken by the subjugated, what is never said to the master, of having to deal with this reality was a very remote possibility. It was in no one's mind. When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree. If you walk out of Harlem, ride out of Harlem, downtown, the world agrees. What you see is much bigger, cleaner, whiter, richer, safer than where you are. They collect the garbage. People obviously can pay their life insurance. The children look happy, safe. You're not. And you go back home. And it would seem then, of course, that it's an act of God, that this is true, that you belong where white people have put you. It is only since the Second World War that there's been a counter image in the world. And that image not come about through any legislation on the part of any American government, but through the fact that Africa was suddenly on the stage of the world, and Africans had to be dealt with in a way that had never been dealt with before. This gave an American Negro for the first time a sense of himself beyond a savage or a clown. It has created, and will create, a great many conundrums. One of the great things that the white world does not know, but I think I do know, is that black people are just like everybody else. One has used the myth of Negro and the myth of color to pretend and to assume that you are dealing essentially with something exotic, bizarre, and practically, according to human laws, unknown. Alas, it is not true. We are also mercenaries, dictators, murderers, liars. We are human too. What is crucial here is that unless we can manage to establish some kind of dialogue between those people whom I pretend have paid for the American dream and those other people who have not achieved it, we will be in terrible trouble. I want to say at the end, at the last, is that is what concerns me most. We are sitting in this room, and we are all, at least we like to think we are, relatively civilized, and we can talk to each other at least on certain levels, so that we could walk out of here assuming that the measure of our enlightenment, or at least our politeness, has some effect on the world. It may not. I remember, for example, when the ex-Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, said that it was conceivable that in 40 years in America we might have a Negro president. And that sounded like a very emancipated
I
statement.
mean, that was a pretty good prediction at the very least.
Yeah.
They were not in Harlem when this statement was first heard, and did not hear, and possibly will never hear, the laughter and the bitterness and the scorn with which the statement was greeted. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barbershop, Bobby Kennedy only got here yesterday. And now he's already on his way to the presidency. We've been here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you're good, we may let you become president. What is dangerous here is the turning away from anything any white American says. The reason for the political hesitation in spite of the Johnson landslide is the one who's been betrayed by American politicians for so long. And I am a grown man, and perhaps I can be reasoned with. I certainly hope I can be. But I don't know, and neither does Martin Luther King. None of us know how to deal with those other people whom the white world has so long ignored, who don't believe anything the white world says and don't entirely believe anything I or Martin say. And one can't blame them. You watch what has happened to them in less than 20 years. It seems to me that the city of New York, for example, this is my last point, which had Negroes in it for a very long time. If the city of New York were able, as it has indeed been able, in the last 15 years to reconstruct itself, tear down buildings and raise great new ones, downtown and for money, and has done nothing whatever except build housing projects in the ghetto for the Negroes. And of course the Negroes hate it. Presently, the property does indeed deteriorate because the children cannot bear it. They want to get out of the ghetto. If the American pretensions were based on more solid, a more honest assessment of life and of themselves, it would not mean for Negroes, when someone says urban renewal, that Negroes simply are going to be thrown out into the streets, which is what it does mean now. This is not an act of God. We're dealing with a society made and ruled by men. If the American Negro had not been present in America, I am convinced that the history of the American labor movement would be much more edifying than it is. It is a terrible thing for an entire people to surrender to the notion that 1/9 of its population is beneath them. And until that moment, until the moment comes when we, the American people, are able to accept the fact that I have to accept, for example, that my ancestors are both white and black, that on that continent we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other, and that I am not a ward of America. I am not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it. And if that happens, it's a very grave moment for the West. Thank you.
So I had completely forgotten, I've seen this before, but I'd forgotten that line about the labor movement. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. I just want to say two things about this, because I've never watched this debate in full. I've seen significant parts of it at different points and seen it dissected, but I decided to just, kind of wait for an opportunity, and this arose. But one of the things is that he really does display like a capacity to weave different things together, particularly the very subjective and the personal, and the universal philosophical and the timeless, in an extraordinarily artful way that testifies to his literary genius. And there's very few people I can think of who would be able to do that as successfully as he does here in this debate. And it shows a real mastery of his craft. And a lot of people aspire to this and aren't able to reach it, right? The second thing that I kind of thought was interesting here is that twice in the debate, he does actually do something that's quite dangerous, which is talk about the impact of segregation and racism on the white population. Both when he talks about the sheriff and how it is that this is impacting his kind of moral outlook about the world. And then later on, of course, when he's talking about the danger all this animosity will pose to Western civilization as a whole. And in a lot of cases, this might be taken as pandering if somebody who is a lesser individual was doing it, right? Be like, well, you're trying to cater to your audience in order to get them to sympathize with you and realize like you have a stake in this as well. But what he was doing actually, I think, is really pointing out and that the damage being caused to the population was a moral and a spiritual one, right? It was really corrupting them from the inside. And this was something that needs to be criticized, but also pitied. And a lot of people wouldn't be able to pull this off successfully, but he's so rhetorically powerful and intelligent in the way that he breaks this down that it doesn't just come across as convincing, but actually edifying, to use his terms, right? Like you really feel like you have to do something about this because a great wrong has been committed, to which everybody is culpable and which everyone is a victim, particularly people of color, but also the victimizers. And it's going to take a long time to expunge that kind of sin.
Yeah, and it's interesting again, like that he's, yeah. So I mean, like the overall case he's making here, and I guess this is important because we started out by saying that the way the debate topic is phrased is so sort of literary and and not that it's not obvious like precisely what that means, but it seems like certainly at least the way that Baldwin seems to be taking it is American society, and he's also tying it into Europe and European imperialism elsewhere is distorted through and through by the oppression of Black people. That seems to be his big that seems to be the way he understands the debate topic. And so in making that case, I think he's trying to show how that's bad for everybody involved. So like the first several minutes were spent explaining how it's bad for its most direct and obvious victims. What it's like to to realize that you don't have this kind of like basic civic equality, that the society, that the country you've pledged allegiance to has not pledged allegiance to you.
Yeah.
That you're sort of locked out of the way the culture understands itself. That's that part about how watching Gary Cooper kill the Indians and realizing that you're the Indians, and certainly in more material ways, which he kind of gets into in various ways, like throughout his opening presentation when he talks about hyper exploited black labor literally building the country in the first place, and when he talks about not being served at the Western Union, all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. It's like that skit, "Are we the baddies?" But then also that it's bad for, and also that it's bad for different kinds of white people in different kinds of ways, right? That it's bad for the Alabama sheriff who's being asked to use brutal violence to enforce this system. And also that it's bad for regular American working people. That line in passing about the labor movement. So in the case of the sheriff, it's bad for his soul. In the case of American white workers, the suggestion in passing, at least, is that it's bad for their pocketbooks. But because he develops the thought a little bit. He says because you're told that however bad you have things, right? At least you're not black. So which is a sort of classic kind of suggestion. It's very similar to the W.E.B. Du Bois' line about the psychological wages of whiteness, which is I think often a little misunderstood, because what Du Bois meant by it, I think, is closer to the use that Baldwin was putting it in here than it is to a lot of contemporary privilege theory, because Du Bois was a Marxist. He thought that like this was fool's gold, that people were accepting these psychological wages over real wages, and it was in their interest to not do that. And I think that's what I think that's what that line about the labor movement and all of that is kind of suggesting. Chomsky versus Foucault, for sure. We should do that sometime. Fun fact, by the way, about that Chomsky-Foucault debate. Somebody mentioned in the chat. Foucault was apparently asked the organizers to pay him in hash, and so then later for however long it took to smoke it all, he and his friend joke about how they're busting out the Chomsky hash. I don't think Chomsky knew that that's how they're paying Foucault, but
hey, whatever works.
Yeah, for sure. But that would be a thing.
I just wanted to say one thing before we move on to watching Buckley's a bit, which I have a sneaking suspicion I'll enjoy less.
Sure.
Which is that people really talk about how people ask a lot of times, like, what makes a deep person, deep-souled individual. It's kind of an old-fashioned rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to give a definition here because I'll be caught into it, but to a certain extent, one's capacity to reflectively associate with other people and to understand things from their standpoint without necessarily agreeing with them is probably a part and parcel of that, right? Because you kind of hold more realities, to use Baldwin's term, in your mind, right? And he's really capable in some ways of empathizing, not just with the victims of oppression, but clearly with the victimizers, right? And seeing things from their standpoint, and has therefore a much more holistic vision of how it is that the world operates. And I think that's one of the reasons this speech has the kind of power that it does, right? Because you get the sense that you're listening to somebody who's not just really thought about these issues politically, but deeply understands what they mean to people in the most fundamental way. And that's a very rare ability to convey, even in a novel, let alone a 15, 20-minute speech, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That he's, Yeah, and it comes across, right. I mean, so it's like you pointed out earlier. It's very novelistic. He's really, he's not doing a 10,000 feet kind of statistical sort of view on this. He's it's full of sentences that start with I. It's about what the experience of not being served at the Western Union, and the experience, for that matter, of being dehumanized by carrying out violence against people who are protesting for their rights. Would be like for somebody, which like you said, the kind of breadth of the vision there is really impressive. But like, he's also, even though he's doing it in this very novelistic way, I think there's actually, obviously the philosophy nerd in me wants him to spell out a little bit more what he means by system of reality and all that stuff. But it's still like, there's like a pretty tight and pretty clear line of argument here, right? Like that hey, is this, I'm saying that American society is poisoned by the treatment of Black people in America, and this is fundamentally unjust. It's fundamentally bad for everybody. So I'm going to talk about the ways that it's happened economically, right? He's going to do that in that novelistic way. I built America. I did the railroads, all that stuff. But that's what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about the cultural dimension, realizing that you're not really considered to be part of the society. He's going to talk about what that does to the psyche of somebody who's growing up under it. He's going to talk about what that does to the psyche of somebody who's carrying it out. And he's also going to, again, it's very artful. It's just in passing. It's like 10 seconds. He's going to talk about what that does to all the people who are taught to identify with a ruling class that they're not part of, because of racial prejudice.
Yeah, and like, what struck me is how very near the beginning he said, like, we're not going to look at the numbers about this, right? We should, but we're not going to. And then, like you said, he really talks about this from various different subjective standpoints, while generalizing out from subjective to the intensely universal, right? And lesser disputants, like myself, I should say, would really want to lean on those numbers, right? We want to point out, like, look at the different ways that these people have been marginalized economically. Look at how it is that they're penalized by the prison system. Look at the way that this has impacted, the American society when it comes to combating wars. Just listing off all these figures, right? And then a constant onrush. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, the numbers tell a very powerful story. But again, it takes a great deal of confidence in your ability to understand the standpoints of other people and the broader philosophical and aesthetic dimensions of what's going on, to come in and just refrain from doing that and give the kind of argument that he did, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Clearly I'm right there with you. Look, I actually did do a debate. When was this? Like a month or two ago, with a right-wing YouTuber about called himself Mr. Reagan, about whether racism was still a significant social problem in the United States, and that was exactly the approach that I took in there, right? I mean, I just I basically tried to like be really careful about the definition, and then I dumped a bunch of studies on him, and I think that in some contexts, there's probably something you can say, for that approach, especially when you're dealing with somebody who is going to try to present themselves as being like very hard-headed, and and present anybody who disagrees as just being overly emotional. But
facts don't care about your feelings kind of crowd.
Yeah, exactly, right. That like if what they're expecting and maybe even kind of hoping for is that you'll just break down and yell at them that they're a racist, that like I think there's something that can be very effective about that. But also, goddamn, I mean, if you can do what James Baldwin does, do that.
Yeah. Well, not all of us are James Baldwin, right? So we do what we can, with what we have. That's for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, speaking of not all of us being James Baldwin, let's watch William F. Buckley.